We always knew that when Labour got into power, they would have to make and essentially deal with 14 years of austerity, funding cuts, and essentially try and deal with the mess after after all that. We knew that that was not going to be easy and that there would be indeed some hard decisions to make going forward. We all, I think, should be very, very, very aware of that. And this is just one such case of where Labour now have to make an incredibly hard decision, because if they decide to continue with this, with getting rid of this fund, which we'll talk about in a moment, and how that actually came about, which, well, surprise, surprise, you'll see in a moment, and it's quite ridiculous how this came about, but it was the Conservatives, so hey, they do deserve some share of the blame there, and now Labour have got to sort this out. But this fund is incredibly flawed, but it has become relied upon by some of the poorest families in the UK. And this was a sticking plaster policy. And we've talked about this countless times on this channel. Sticking plaster policies do not work. Fundamentally, they are done and implemented to try and solve a problem. Now, sometimes you can do a quick fix while saying this is going to be in place while we do this to make sure that this problem, is either solved over time or done in the future. But that was, as we know well, that was not the Tory way. Rather, stick the plaster over and, problem solved, right? Right. Problem solved, right, guys? No, that wasn't to be. But we'll get talking about this in a moment. And trust me, it is incredibly frustrating when you realize what is potentially about to happen over this. And now, what Labour are going to do, we don't know what Labour are going to do to try and solve this problem. But this is, once again, not something you can quickly, solve with a sticking plaster policy. You've got to have long-term, long commitments of, funding and policy to help these poorest families in their situation. And ideally, you want to get out of that situation. You want to get those families out of that situation. And I want to remind people, the last time Labour in power, they almost eliminated child poverty. And that is something that the last Labour government should be heavily recognised for. And hopefully this government as well, now that they are in power again, something that they can work towards. And if the last Labour government came close to that, then there is no reason why we cannot believe that they cannot do so again. So we're going to get more into this in a moment, but before we do that, please remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there's the Patreon page, there's the Buy Me Coffee link, there's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, there's the Pony Club as well. And it is Wednesday, so Patreon and Pony Club members, you will have a new Pony Club video as well. So let's crack on into this then, shall we? So the fund in particular we are talking about is the Household Support Fund. Where did this come from? You won't be surprised to learn that back in 2021, when the government at the time was going to get rid of the £20 uplift from universal credit, if you may think back to those days, that had been brought in during COVID times to help the most sort of poor people on universal credit, to help them live, help them survive during this time. And that money, that £20 alone, was, I think it was totaled something well over, like, I think it was like 2,000 something pounds extra a year that they would have, and that would of course help food, help fund them. And of course, this was explicitly brought in as like a COVID policy, but then when we were coming out of COVID, everyone, all the sort of charities, funds, and etc., were all coming out and saying, no, you shouldn't get rid of this. This has actually been really successful. It has really helped out families who are in a bad state, who are in poverty. it will help. It has helped them. Why get rid of it? Why not just make this a permanent thing? But of course, remember, government really didn't want to do that at the time. But of course, if you remember, there was a backbench rebellion, and this is where this gets dumb. How this fund first came about, and how then everyone has then come to rely on this fund. So there was a backbench rebellion by Conservative MPs saying, if you get rid of this fund, it is going to rocket families into poverty, food poverty, hunger, etc. We do not want you to do this. So, as a compromise, the government at the time then went, well, okay, we'll make this fund and we'll call it the Housing Security Fund, Household Support Fund, or the HSF, and this will be there to be designed as we'll give them this for a year because don't worry, guys, growth will come. This was the argument at the time. This is this is what will happen. Growth will come, and don't worry. By 2024, because this was brought in by 2021, by 2024, we won't need this fund at all. Now, of course, this fund ends at the I think it's end of next month, I believe. So time is really ticking on this, because if this fund goes, then this fund that is again given to councils, bear in mind, as I said, flawed, distributed very unevenly, meaning the areas that really need it more don't get the proper funding. What a surprise. Versus the areas that don't need this type of funding, well, guess what? As we found out, they've been using it to spend on other things like plugging fiscal black holes, or funding other social services. So classic sticking plaster policy. But the problem now becomes, what does Labour do? Now, Labour really has a lot of choices here. They could continue with this, and I think there are arguments for continuing this. But what is needed? What is needed is, as I said at the beginning, not to have just another sticking plaster policy. You need something that's going to help these people long term, help eliminate poverty, help get these families out of the situation that they are in, raise them up. So we know already Rachel Reeves is considering tax rises. We know that this is probably going to be the first, quote, big test of the financial rules. As I said before, hey, now you're in power, you can go, well, we're going to have to do this. And oh, yes, this is still within our financial rules because guess what? We raise taxes. It's all fine. It's all paid for. I am really confident that something else will come of this, that either this will be continued potentially for another 6 months while there is, because we know there's the big sort of review coming in by Labour on a lot of the social services and welfare that are received, and how they can look at that, how they can sort of improve that. Something good, we hope will come from that. But in the meantime, this is not an easy decision to make, and I do not envy anyone in the government looking at this, knowing that this is an incredibly flawed fund that people rely on, and people are reliant on. And as much as getting rid of it and putting something else in, there needs to be that something else in, and maybe you need to make sure that this fund exists. Maybe we need to sort of re-examine how it's done, how it's funded, how it's looked at, rechange the balancing formula. Now, again, I don't know. I don't have the answers for this, but this is definitely something that we talked about before. If Labour won, they would have to sort of deal with a lot of very, very toxic Tory policies and legacies and, sticking plasters like this. And they're going to have to do something about it. But the question is, what are they going to do going forward on it? So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.